All right, here we go. Tonight we are learning, I have to share a doc with you guys. Tonight we're going to be learning Eruvin Pei Daled. I'm going to share with you a document that we will be using tonight in order to help us have some degree of clarity with tonight's sugya. Baruch Hashem, it happens to be that tonight's sugya is particularly clean and simple. And it's basically a couple of basics, the background, and then we'll find the Machlokas Rav and Shmuel, and we will ask 4 questions on this Machlokas Rav and Shmuel, and then a little cap on the evening. It'll be just fine. So we're actually starting very high on Pei Gimel Amud Beis at the Mishnah, and Baruch Hashem for that. Baruch Hashem in part because yesterday's blot took a toll on my preparation time, and because it happens to work out very nicely for today. So let's get started. Says the Mishnah, Pei Gimel Amud Beis, 8 lines down. Anshe Chatzer v'Anshe Mirpeses. If you have people who live in a Chatzer or whose house dumps into a Chatzer, v'Anshe Mirpeses, people who have a porch that overlooks that same Chatzer, Sheshachachu v'lo Eruv. The two of them together did not make an Eruv. So the halacha is like this. Kol shegvoa yod tfachim, anything that's 10 tfachim or taller, we appropriate that space, the mirpeses, to the higher, to the taller space, which is the mirpeses, the porch. Pachos mikan, if it's less than that, l'chatzer, then we would appropriate that space to the chatzer. What about chulios habor? What about the, if you have a pit in the ground, if you look at the picture, actually, you'll see this. The chulia is the space that's above the ground. Let's say you have a bore that's many feet down. So the chulia is the rim of dirt that sits around the bore, but above ground. So that's what our Mishnah is talking about. Chulios habor, if you have that, or vehasela, a large rock, shehein gvohim, asarat tfachim. If in fact they are 10 tfachim tall, then there we appropriate the mirpeses. We give that space to the mirpeses, to the taller of the two inhabitants of the chatzer. Pachos mikan, if the rock or if the chulios of the pit are less than that, then l'chatzer we appropriated it. When do we say that there is any givings of space to the mirpeses versus the chatzer? Bismucha. That's only when the item in discussion, be it a rock, be it the rim around the chulia, whatever it is, that's only true bismucha when it's close to the actual mirpeses. Aval b'mufleges, if it is further away, afilu gvo yotvachim lechatzer. If it is further away, then we would seemingly give it to the chatzer. We'll see that that's not so pashut as to what these words mean. Lechatzer, not so clear. The ezo hi smucha. What is the measured amount with which we're trying to say what's smucha and not smucha? So take a look at the picture for a moment. We have our pit, we have the chulia on top. Well, we would only say that if it's above 10 tefachim that it goes to the guy on the top. His name is Chaim. That's what it says in the bubble. Chaim would only get this space if one thing happened. If it's within what? Says the Mishnah, kol she'eina rechoka arba tefachim. It has to be within 4 tefachim, a very small amount. Your arm's length is wider than that. So it's not a usability concept. Maybe the Rishonim would have to debate, is this lavud issue? Where do we get 4 tefachim from? Normally we say lavud is 3. We know the famous shita that we saw in the Gemara earlier, that there is a shita of daled. Okay, what to be discussed? But the Mishnah says 4 tefachim. Now the Gemara is going to present a number of cases that are very obvious to us, and then it's going to present one case that is less obvious, or a case that's unclear actually. Pshita, says the Gemara, what's obvious to us? Lo zeh b'Pesach v'lo zeh b'Pesach, hainu chalon shebein shtei chatzeros. If in fact we the two locations had equal access to something, both like a door, where we can both access the door, then hainu, that's similar to the Mishnah, and in fact to the whole parak that we learned called chalon shebein shtei chatzeros. And here Rashi, the second of the middle width lines, 2/3 of the way down, Rashi here writes hainu chalon shebein beis chatzeros klomar. That's not the case. Is it asur or mutter? So this case, where it's like if you go back to the first line of our Gemara, when is Pesach? When is Zela Pesach v'Lazeb Pesach? That everyone has a similar access to this middle ground space, then we treat it like the parak of Chalon. What about Lezeb Izrika v'Lazeb Izrika? About throwing things. There we said Hainu Kosel Shebein Beis Chatzeros. Remember we spoke about the wall. Maybe there are fruits on top of the wall, and there maybe you can walk against the width of the wall, provided that it's a certain depth of the wall. Okay, that's all like the case of Kosel Shebein Beis Chatzeros. Lozeb Shilshul v'Lozeb Shilshul. What if the only way to get something is by dropping something into a pit? Let's say you have a bucket on the end of a rope. You have to let down some rope to get what you want out of the pit. Then we would say Hainu Charetz All of these cases are obvious. That's like the case of the ditch in the ground, shebein beis chatzeros. We had a drawing for this a couple of weeks ago. Now, what about a different case? What about when things aren't equal? What about lazeb pesach velazeb zrika? Let's say for me it's easy access, but for you it's bezrika. The only way you can utilize that space is by throwing. So there, the Gemara says no. That we don't. That's not a machlokes at all, and there are no caveats there. It's simple. Hainu de Rava bar Rav Huna amar Rav Nachman. It's very simple. And this Rashi highlights this. If you look at Rashi, 7 lines from the bottom of the Rashi says, Dibur Hamaschal Hainu de Rava bar Rav Huna beperak chalon de Amar kosal shebein bein chaseros gavoa yud betzido echad shava la'aretz. If there's a side that's closer to the ground, nos nenosol is shava ba'aretz. We give it to the person for whom it's easier. So the case of lezeb pesach v'lezeb zrika, that's also easy. One more case. What about lezeb pesach v'lezeb shilshul? What if for one person the space in the middle is easy access, but for the other person he has to take a rope and let down rope to get to the bottom of the pit and then draw some up? Hainu de Rav Shezi amar Rav Nachman, where of course we'd give preference to the person for whom it's easier, and then he would get that space. And now we're going to enter our sugya for tonight. All of the above is clear. What's not clear? We are about 8 lines from the bottom of the page, 9 lines from the bottom of the page, and the Gemara says as follows. What about a case where one person has to simply let a rope down in order to get to the bottom of the pit, and the other person has to throw in order to get it? Which one is worse? I understand if we both have the same access, whatever the halacha is, it is. But now look at our picture. Chaim standing there up on his porch. In order for him to get down to the bottom of the pit, he lets down a rope into the bottom of the pit, no problem. But David, who's standing to the left of the pit, he has to throw over the rim that's on top of the pit. That's zrika. So which one of those is considered easier use? Says the Gemara. If for one person, letting down a rope to the bottom is the way he can access, and for the other person, first throwing and then getting access to the bottom, which one's better, which one's worse? So says the Gemara, Amar Rab, Shneihen Asurin. We treat them as equally uncomfortable. They asur each other. Okay? Shmuel Amar, no sein oso, no snin oso lezeshe b'shilshul. We appropriate this property, we give this property to the person who simply has to let the rope down. Looking at our picture, that means that Chaim would have right to this space because all he has to do is let the rope down, which is here the shilshul. Masha'en Kain, David to the left of the bore has to throw it over the rim of the chulia, which is considered to be more of a tircha. And therefore, says the Gemara, Shelazet Tashmisha benachas. For one person, it's easier, namely Chaim, letting down the rope. Velazet Tashmisha bekasha. The other one has to work a little bit harder, namely David. He has to throw over the rim in order to get to the bore. And what's our rule? When we have two people who are accessing one item, one can access it more easily than the other, then so that's the machlokas between Rab and Shmuel. If you look on the left side of this whole drawing, all the way to the left, Rab says that shilshul and zrika are considered equal, and they therefore forbid on one another the use of that middle property, whatever it is, in this case, the chulia. And Shmuel says, no, we give it to the person who's being mishalshel because that's considered less of a tircha than zrika. Now the Gemara is going to pose 4 questions over the next block that grapple with understanding this case. The first is a question that seems very obvious from our Mishnah itself. Tanan, look at our very Mishnah, 4 lines from the bottom of Pei Gimel Amud Beis. And the Gemara poses the following question. Our case, you have one person whose house dumps into the chatzer, and another person who's on a mirpeses, and they forgot to be ma'arib with one another. If there's something that's the common space of then it is asar tfachim. Then it goes to the person for the mirpeses. If it's less than asar tfachim, pachos mikan lechatzer. Then we give that middle space to the chatzer. Kasal kadaitach. What might you have thought? What was the havamina of our Mishnah? My mirpeses. What is the mirpeses that we're talking about? It's bnei aliyah. It's the second floor of the building, a whole floor up. And why umay karule mirpeses? If it's a whole floor up, then why are we calling it a mirpeses? Call it bnei aliyah. Why did you call it? If what you're saying is that our Mishnah is really talking about a second floor, don't call it a mirpeses. What's the havamina here? Umay karla mirpeses. The reason why we called it a mirpeses is because tikasalki bin mirpeses. How you get up and how you get down. You have to use the mirpeses to get there. Alma. What do we see from here? If pshat in our Mishnah that our case is a case of mirpeses, and we see that our Mishnah says that if it's greater than yud, greater than 10, that you are then going to give it to the person on the mirpeses. V'haraya, Shmuel, you're right. Shmuel must be right because we see a Mishnah exactly like Shmuel. So how does the Gemara answer to solve? This is our question number one. If you look under the Rav and Shmuel machlokes that you have on the left side of the picture here, it says my mirpeses. How do we define mirpeses? Well, the way we initially understood it, the Havamina was that it's a second floor, and it was only called mirpeses because the only way to get to the second floor is from the mirpeses. Answers the Gemara 3 lines down on the top of Pedal. No. Rav can still have his way with our Mishnah. How would Rav understand our Mishnah? The same way Rav Huna understood a different Mishnah. Kida'amar Rav Huna elsewhere, which we're going to learn soon, la'osan hadarim b'mirpeses. No, our Mishnah is not talking about where the person who lived on the mirpeses was living on a second floor. No, they were all within a similar height level. And in fact, says Rav Huna, la'osan hadarim b'mirpeses. They live right next to that porch. So in our picture, Chaim, see that little porch? That goes into his house. It's not a gateway to get to the second floor. His house is right there, parallel to the mirpeses, the porch he's standing on. Hachanami, here too, Rav would have argued in our Mishnah that the Osan hadarim b'mirpeses. Fundamentally, how does Rav understand our Mishnah? Differently than Shmuel. Shmuel would have understood our Mishnah that it's really 2 floors. And therefore, our Mishnah is a perfect proof that the person who's on the mirpeses, really the second floor, it's code word, they get access to whatever they're talking about in the middle that's more than 10 tvachim. Says Rav, you misunderstood our Mishnah. Our Mishnah is not talking about that. Our Mishnah is where it's not that high off the ground. It's not a second floor. It's a lower mirpeses. Says the Gemara, ihachi. If that's true, what you're saying, Rav and Rav Huna, what you're saying that our Mishnah is really dealing with a lower mirpeses and not a second floor, then I don't understand. Amai, why would you say that? If you're saying that the porch is very low, well, then they're both in the same height range. So then it's not lazeb shilshul and lazeb zrika. It's the same height. They both have the same access because it's not a difference of 10 tvachim. So why would you say they're different? So says the Gemara, my lechatzer, when the Mishnah says, and this was, I gave this hint away a little bit in the Mishnah. If you look back in our Mishnah, when it says at the third line of our Mishnah, pachos mikan lechatzer, it doesn't mean that it only goes to the chatzer. My lechatzer, af lechatzer, namely, that the person in the mirpeses and the person in the chatzer, both of them have the same status toward that item, and therefore b'shnei masurin. Rav retranslates our Mishnah that when our Mishnah says that it's pachos miyud, that it's lechatzer, it doesn't mean only to the people who live in the chatzer, but that everyone's treated as though they live in the chatzer, and therefore they aser on one another. And if you look back in our notes on the left side here, Rav shnei masurin, that's pshat in our Mishnah. It's a lower mirpeses. We're all level playing field, and therefore it's less than 10 tvachim. We're both in the same daled amos, 10 tvachim, and therefore we are going to aser on one another. And in fact, the Gemara brings a raya to this shita of Rav. Hachanami mistabra. It has to be this way. Why? Because midikatani seifa. Because of what it says in the end of our Mishnah. But medvar mamurim, we said, where does our Mishnah have its cases? Where does it all apply? Bismucha. Only when it's close to the mirpeses. Aval b'mufleges, if it's far away, afilu gvoa yud tfachim lechatzer. It said there that if it was more than 10 away, it should go to the chatzer. Why would it go to the chatzer? They're both equals now. My lechatzer, ileim lechatzer v'shari. If you want to say that what it means to the Mishnah is that when it's muflag, when it's far away from the mirpeses, then it goes to the guy in the chatzer and it's mutter to him. If that's what you want to say, amai. Why would you say that? Rishusa detarvayu, they're equally inconvenient to both. It's far away enough from the mirpeses that it's not easy to access, and it's above 10 tvachim for the guy in the chatzer. They should be shaveh. So that's how the Gemara says, Hachanami, my lechatzer. Here too, we see in that case in the Seifa, what does it mean lechatzer? So elamai lechatzer, af lechatzer b'shnei masurin. Hachanami, here too, and the Reish of our Mishnah, my lechatzer, af lechatzer b'shnei masurin shmamina. Rav brings a beautiful raya from the end of our very Mishnah to show. You started out by asking me that maybe our Mishnah is like Shmuel, that it's b'nei Aliyah, that it's really a second floor. Answers the Gemara, not only is that wrong, and Rav could understand the Mishnah differently, but Rav brings a raya to his derech, that in fact what we're talking about is a mirpeses that's very low to the ground, and therefore Rav stands very strong. In fact, we actually do paskin like Rav in this case. The Rambam quotes Rav lahalacha. Let's continue. That was question 1. If you look on the bottom left of this drawing, it says in the box with the 4 questions, Chulios habor v'hasela. So let's get into that question. We're 1/3 of the way down Pei Dalet and Aleph. Question number 2 on the machlokes of Rav and Shmuel. We already answered one attack against Rav. Let's see who this question is against. Tanan. Chulios habor, take a look at our picture. There's a rim of dirt that surrounds a pit. Vihasela, or a rock of similar size, shehin gvoan asara. If in fact they are 10 tall, then that space is usable for the mirpeses. Pachos mikan, said our Mishnah, lechatzer. So that's our question mark. What does that seem? It seems to be just like we said earlier. It seems to be that we see a distinction between the mirpeses and the chatzer, and therefore it seems like Shmuel. Says the Gemara, no, I can answer the same way I answered before, that this din in our Mishnah also, Amar Rav Huna, Lo'osan Hadar ben Mirpeses. We're not talking about a very elevated B'nai Aliyah. It's not a very high space. It's really closer to the ground. Says Gemara, fine, Teinach Sela, I got it. I understand the whole thing with the rock. Rock formations don't change that quickly. I know the story about Rabbi Akiva. That's over many years. From one Shabbos to the next, no one's going to lose a lot of rock, right? So says the Gemara, bor, ma'ikol amemar. But what would you say about a pit? So says Rashi. Rashi here is key. Rashi here is Ela bor. It's right about halfway down. And you'll see Dibur Hamaskal Ela bor shememalan heimenu. If there's a pit that you're filling up water from it on Shabbos, Tashmishto b'shilshulhu, there you need to lower a basket in there. Afilu l'bnei mirpeses, no matter where you are, sharimi karka iso dolan, you have to, from the ground, wherever you are, you're going to have to draw up water. V'shma mina, and what seems to be the case, says Rashi, Dehoel ulibnei chatzer tashmisho b'zrika, since the people whose house dumps into the chatzer, they have to do zrika. Why do they have to do zrika? She'in yichol lemalos elim kein zorkin deli lemala min chulia. Look at the drawing by David. You have to throw over the chulia to get into the bore. So then that says Rashi Yavina la libnei mirpeses to b'shilshul kishmul. It seems there. Now this picture is really a perfect drawing. There's much more detail in this picture that relates to this shaila. If we go back into our Gemara, the question is basically like this: Bor, where is the Gemara here? 1/3 of the way down. Bor ma'i kolameimar. It seems to be very, very clear here that we would paskin like Shmuel that the bnei mirpeses should get it. So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yitzchak Bereid Rav Yehuda Hacha bebor maleo mayim askinan. Here, you don't need to be mishalshel to get all the way to the bottom of the pit. There's water at the top of the pit. So even if I'm living I'm a ben chotzer, I don't live in the mirpeses, just take the pitcher, scoop a little bit of water so that I'm an equal to the other person. So that's how Rav would like to answer. Why? Once you start taking away water, the volume of water is going to be lower. And then back to supporting Shmuel's Shita. Says the Gemara, no. Since when the pit would have been full with water, we would have said it's permissible. So they would have been equals. So then, just like Rav, then we would extend that leniency even when there's less water. Says the Gemara, that svara should be the exact reverse. Adirabba, what should be is as follows. Since had it been empty when there was no water in the bor, it would have been asir. Like the question itself, kimalya nami asira. We should have said that now that the bor is full, doesn't make a difference. We will not be lenient here. The Gemara embraces this. The Rishonim should spend some time on this. Why is one svar better than the other? If the pit is exactly right. How do we view the bor? And why do we give preferential treatment over the chumrah here? Maybe we should use our regular rules of Eruvin Lakula. Why over here are we doing this? We need to spend time in the Rishonim, which we're not going to do now. But there is a discussion here about why we have a preference for following the stringency here of saying, no, we have to follow the standard of had the pit been empty, and therefore when it's full, we will not be makil. So fine, for another time. But that's what the Gemara says. It's Adarab, we don't like that argument. Therefore, the Gemara says halfway down, Amar Abaye, Hacha bebor malea peiros askina. We're not dealing with water. We're dealing with a pit that's filled with fruit. Says the Gemara, okay, Rav might have an answer because maybe I don't have to dig down to get to the bottom. I can grab an apple from the top of the pit without using a string in a bucket. But says the Gemara, v'chasre, people eat. So the level of fruit's going to reduce over the course of Shabbos. Says the Gemara, no, they don't, because it's betivla. It's tevel, so you're not allowed to move the fruit. So therefore, now what are you using it for? You can put other things on top of it. So now Rav has a good answer. Says the Gemara, in fact, this is a very good answer. Dekanami, Rav is really going strong here because now this is the second time he's supporting his answer. Says the Gemara, Dekanami, we can prove this. Diktani, dumya desela. This is a good argument because we said it's similar to a rock which does not reduce in size. So too, we must be dealing with a case where it does not reduce in size. What is that? That's a case of fruit that's tevel, where we're not going to be taking that on Shabbos. Big discussion in the Meforshim is the tevel muksa. Can you move it to make space for something? Okay, fine. So that's how the Gemara again answers this question. But then asks the Gemara a practical question. Okay, if what you're telling me is that The case of the drawing here of a chulia on top of a bore, and the case of a sela, a rock of similar size, are both the same din. Why both? Why do I need both of them? They're both the same thing. You taught them together, and you compared the sela to a chulia with fruit in it that's tevel. So why do I need both cases? Answers the Gemara, tzricha. We need to have both cases. If I only would have had the case of the sela of the rock, then I would have thought the lake of the migzar. In that case, that rock is never going anywhere. So I never have to worry about what happens if something's of similar size and reduces in volume over Shabbos. It's a rock. Aval bor, maybe I would have thought ligzor, that we have to make exer, zimnin demalia peros mesukanim. Maybe this time the fruit that they put in there was mesukan. It's not tevel, it's edible. And now we have to worry that people are going to take a lot of fruit on Shabbos. Therefore, tzricha, therefore we need both. And that solves question number 2. Rav stands strong yet again. Question 3, 9-10 lines from the bottom. Look in our notes on the left side. Ziz yotze min hakosel. What if there is a protrusion from the wall? That's going to be our third question here. Tashma. Anshe chatzer va'anshe aliyah. We have people who live in a chatzer and people who live on a second floor. Sheshachachu v'lo irvu. And they forgot to make an eruv. Anshe chatzer mishtamshin ba'asara hatachtonim. The 10 tfachim on the bottom of the wall, the people on the bottom are able to use, the people in the chatzer. Anshe aliyah, the people who live upstairs, mishtamshin ba'asara ha'elyonin. They live on the top, they can use the top 10 tfachim. Ketzad. What is the example of this? Says the Gemara. Ziz yotze min hakosel. If you have a protrusion in the wall, lemata me'asara lechatzer. If that protrusion in the wall is within 10 tfachim of the ground, it's usable by the chatzer. Lemala me'asara. What if the ziz, this protrusion, is above 10 tfachim? Then, of course, it's la'aliyah. What's the diuk of this brisa? Hadbeini beini aser. What if you'd have something in between? You wouldn't be allowed to use it. That sounds a lot like Rav, Kasha, and Shmuel. Now, the other two questions were against Rav. This question's against Shmuel. Says the Gemara, no problem at all. Amar Rav Nachman, how would Shmuel answer this up? Hacha bekosel tisha asar askinan. You can't bring a raya from this brisa because this brisa, says Rav Nachman, was talking about a very specific case. One that you can't bring a proof from about the case of the Beni Beni, which was the case you were trying to learn. Amar Rav Nachman, what was the case? Hacha bekosel tisha asar askinan. The wall was a total of 19 tfachim high. If the ziz is within 10 tfachim, so then for the lower one it's easier to use, and for the higher one it's harder to use. So therefore we give our preferential treatment to the lower one. And lamala me'asar, if the ziz is above 10 tfachim, then lazeb pesach, the lazeb is rika, we would give preferential treatment to the ziz that's protruding above 10 tfachim, to the aliyah, and everything works out just fine.
What are you throwing to get what?
So there's a protrusion from the wall. So let's say that this is our wall and my Gemara is the protrusion. Sticks in. A little ledge. So if it's below 10 tfachim and I live in the chatzer, I can use it. You live upstairs, you can't use it. It's within 10 tfachim. The below 10 tfachim is mine. But let's say that the protrusion is sticking out of the wall at 18 tfachim. Well, you're upstairs, you can use it, I cannot, right?
Right.
So that's what the Gemara is saying is going on here, is that we just have to make sure the wall is not taller than 19 in this brisa. Because if we don't say that, it will be a question on Shmuel. Because if it was, there would be a diuk in there. Let's say the wall was 30 high. So then if you have nothing in the middle, or you have a ziz at the 15 tefach mark, and it was a 30 tefach wall, then there would be a kashi on Shmuel, because there's a diuk in this brisa that if it was in between 10 and 20 tefachim, that it would create an isser status, which would be Rav, Shita, all the way through. That's Rav, Shita, kashi on Shmuel. So it says the Gemara, you're right, it would be, but that's not what the brisa is talking about. The wall is a total of 20 tefachim, and we create that ukimta to dissolve the question against Shmuel. So that answers question number 3. And with that, we turn to the top of Pei Daled Amud Beis, and we are going to learn question number 4. Tashma, Shteg Zuz Tros. You have 2 protrusions of porches sticking out of the wall. The picture books are sometimes helpful for this. There are a lot of different iterations of what this means. Basically, what is missing here, and we will learn this Mishnah in a couple of blot. Where is this Mishnah? The Mishnah is on Pei Zayin. We'll learn it in a few days, Emir Hashem. You have 2 Gzuz Tros. Zu l'malam zu, one is above the other, but not directly, as Rashi points out. They're above one another, and they're also over water. So this Gemara assumes that we know Mishnayos by heart, which unfortunately we don't. But had we learned all of them, we would know that Shteg Zuz Tros, right, the case where it's over the water. And there's a mechitza by one of the Gzuz Tros. Let's say that I have a Gzuz Tro right here. This is my porch protruding over the water, and I made a hole in my porch to draw water from the ground. No problem. What about my porch over here? You're my neighbor, so you have a porch next to me. I have a hole in my porch and you don't have a hole in your porch. So that's the case over here. So it says the Gemara, Zu l'mal mizu, asu le'elyona v'lo asu le'tachtona. If you made an access point for water in the upper porch, v'lo asu le'tachtona, but not in the lower one, shtehen asuras ad she'arvu. You're not allowed to utilize that other. You can't go to your neighbor's porch and draw up water. You're not allowed to do that. So what does that sound like? That sounds like Rav, Kasha, and Shmuel yet again. Amar Rav Barava, don't worry. No, they're not. You can't even compare the case, because what we're talking about is where the person in the tachtona is going to use a ladder in a mutter way to get up to the other person's porch where they're able to draw. So that case is not comparable to our case, and therefore answer number one of Rav Barava is not a Kasha and Shmuel. Answer number two is Abai, 4 lines down, Pedal and Beis. Amar Abai kigon de kaimen b'soch asara de hadade. The reason why we're going to say that it's problematic is not because of Rav versus Shmuel. The reason why we're saying it's problematic is because both Rishuyos are within 10 tefachim of one another. V'lo mibaya kamar. It's coming to teach you that which is obvious. Lo mibaya, I know the obvious. Asu l'tachtona, if the lower porch were to have made an access point for water. Those two are for sure going to be problematic. Because they're within 10 tefachim of one another, that you are not allowed to utilize those two reshuyos. What's the chiddush? Even if the porch on the upper porch would have had access to the water below, and the lower one did not, I might have thought that I might have had a havamina that the upper porch was better off, that the upper porch was able to draw up water because by them it was easy, and by the lower one it was bekashe. So I might have thought therefore the upper porch had the heter to draw up water while the lower one did not. Kamash Malan, says the Gemara, absolutely not. Because they're within 10 tefachim of one another, so therefore they forbid one another. Kiha, this is similar, says the Gemara. Well, we'll see if it's similar. Kiha, maybe this is similar to Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel. Maybe this is similar to the following case. Gag hasamach l'reshus harabim. You have a roof that is close to the reshus harabim. The Meforshim point out here that three sides of this building are surrounded by Rishus Harabim, and one side is surrounded by Rishus Hayachid. So can you go utilize this property on Shabbos? So Gaga Samach Rishus Harabim, Tzarach Sulam Kavu Lahatiro. You need a ladder that's permanent going from the ground to the roof to be able to use it. Sulam Kavua in, only if it's a permanent ladder, Sulam Arai lo, but it can't be a temporary ladder. We discussed permanent and temporary ladders. My taima, why does it have to be a sulam kavua but not a temporary sulam? La mishum, isn't that true? Because this is a very low roof and everything is so close to one another, and therefore, just like we learned above with Abaye's answer to the fourth question of our Gemara, everything's within 10 tefachim and therefore aser. Answers the Gemara, and with this we'll close. Maskefla Papa. This is a maskefla that's rhetorical. We're not going to see an answer to it. He says, no, that's not correct. Why? Because vidilma ksherabim mekatven ala bekumta v'sudra. No, maybe the reason why is not because it's within 10 tefachim. Maybe this case is where they were not within 10 tefachim. But the reason why is because people are mekatven. When people are traveling, they use that space to put their hats down. They use that space to readjust some packages. And bekumta v'sudra, their hat and their scarves. That's what Rashi here says. Sheregilan laseis alav v'chol kovenu ma'afores the tashmish noach v'hagunhu. And it's not because it's within 10 tefachim. So the Gemara rejects this last comparison to say that our case of the water is similar to this case of the Gaga Samach Rishus Harabim, and that is our Sugya Sikum Hadvarim. What did we learn tonight? Machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Do we say like this picture that when one has the access of being mishalshel, of lowering something in, is that of more easy use or more difficult use than Zrika? Machlokes Shmuel and Rav. A couple of questions on Rav, which he got out of. A couple of questions on Shmuel, which he got out of. And Ladina, we paskin like Rav. We'll stop here. Beautiful night, everybody.